So what I want to speak about is the book by Neil Stevenson, Seven Eves. And I chose him because he stands out really like Arthur Clarke in his time by the fact that he includes great many actual scientific research results in his science fiction. I'm repeating great many because there are some reviewers who actually complain about it because it's somebody said it reads like transcription from technology lectures. Indeed, in 7 years, there is a lot of space science, and sometimes it seems that the author forgets that he was writing a work of fiction, and that it's only the end, not the very end, which I'm not going to comment upon because it happens in 5,000 years later and has nothing to do with our topic. But then at the end, he sort of introduced some kind of romance or something, but all the rest is about technology and about space science. But I've learned, and then it was much easier to understand, that Stevenson has been employed part-time by Bezos in Blue Origin for 7 years, actually. And when he stopped working there, he started writing this book, or so he says in some interviews. So just shortly about the plot. The moon breaks into 7 pieces, but continues to revolve around the Earth. That is, those 7 pieces continue to revolve. Alas, it soon turns out that the break was not final. The 7 pieces will continue to divide, and a white sky, that is a cloud of dust, and a hard rain, a bombardment by meteorites, will depopulate the Earth. So something must be done, and something is being done. And one of the solutions is to build a so-called cloud ark and send the delegates who will carry on the human race in small arklets to join the existing International Space Station called ISS or EASY. Stevenson adds that probably it was started called EASY when both women running it, both person running it were women. By the way, this is Dinah Macquarie, or at least this is how she looked like if the movie based on the 7 Eves will ever made. Ron Hubbard is supposedly doing it, but it takes time. So at any rate, in the novel, ISS is bolted to an asteroid called Amalthea, because the original function, this connection, was to mine the asteroid for nickel and iron. And this work was to be done and is being done by robots that are programmed, run, and supervised by Dinah Macquarie. And Dinah Macquarie was responsible for much of what went on in the EASY's forward end, whereas Ivy, I'm not going to pronounce it because it will be wrong probably. So, well, she's called Ivy mostly, like Dinah is called Dinah. She, another woman who has the overall command of EASY and is sitting in its back part. Turns out that management in space is rather complicated. These are some quotes from how Stevenson describes it. Dinah programmed, tested, and evaluated a menagerie of robots, ranging in size from cockroach to cocker spaniel, all adapted for the task of crawling around on the surface of Amalthea, analyzing its mineral composition, cutting bits off, and taking them to smelter. Scurrying over the asteroid's surface was a score of different robots belonging to 4 distinct species. One that looked like a snake, one that picked its way along like a crab, one that looked like a sort of rolling geodesic dome, and another that looked like a swarm of insects. Most software developers have had to write code, compile it into a program, and then run the program to see whether it was working as intended. Dinah wrote code, beamed it into the robots scurrying around on Amalthea's surface a few meters away, and stared out the window to see whether it was working. He actually adds that because of that, the robots that were closer to the window were better developed than the robots that were farther on, because she couldn't see them very well. That sounds perfectly simple, but the problem was, or the problem, many problems that continually arose. For example, and this is something that's, I think, sounds familiar, there was a possible shortage of transistors because they could be destroyed by cosmic rays, and the new ones would not be sent from Earth anymore. So the world's military industrial complexes had put a lot of money and brain power into making rat-hard electronics, more resistant to cosmic ray strikes. The resulting chips and circuit boards were, by and large, clunkier than the sleek consumer electronics that Earthbound customers had come to expect. A lot more expensive too. So much so that Dinah had avoided using them at all in her robots. She used cheap, tiny, off-the-shelf electronics in the expectation that a certain number of her robots would be found dead every week. A functional robot could carry a dead one back to the little airlock between Dinah's workshop and the pitted surface of Amalthea, and Dinah could swap its fried circuit board out for a new one. She made the robots carve a little hollow into the side of the tunnel, a storage niche. She packaged up all of her spare chips and PC boards into a bundle. She handed it off to an 8-legged robot and sent that robot through the airlock and down the tunnel. She maneuvered it into the niche and then made it splay out its arms and go rigid so that it couldn't drift out. Her transistors were now safe. So now to the robots, because there were several types of robots. There was a grubby crab, which was the one with 8 legs, made mostly of iron, with an electromagnet on its tip, which kept it on the surface of the asteroid. It was good for picking things up, and when he was picking, it was picking things up, it switched off the magnet. Then there was a sieve, which was originally designed for exploring collapsed buildings. This is not for the first time, and I will come back to this topic again, that this incredible extreme surroundings like this space is actually a place to use, perhaps in an extended way, of solutions, the technical solutions well known from the Earth. So the electromagnets of a sieve were arranged around its body in a double helix, so it could roll diagonally by switching some of them on and some of them off. Then there was a bucky, which was short of a kind of football, and it was bigger and spherical, so it could roll in various directions. And then maybe the most interesting nuts, nanorobots, were powered by the sun and were supposed to work in a swarm. So when she was giving her instructions to them, it was the instruction to the whole swarm. So from our point of view, it was interesting to see how the line management looked out over there. There was another problem. There was an IMIR, a comet mining spacecraft, which was meant to bring an ice comet close to Easy, thus supplying it with water, but it burst, killing its crew. So its shard had to be reached and entered. A quote again. Dinah was entirely consumed with coordinating the efforts of robots. The number of nuts was in the tens of thousands. They could only be talked to collectively as swarms. Trying to address and control them one by one, while theoretically possible, was a max game. Their general task was to morph the shard. One swarm would be working on the inner surface of the nozzle bell. At the moment, all of those were out on the back end of the shard, sunning themselves to build up their internal reserves of power. At a signal from Dinah, they would all converge on the circular maw of the nozzle, climb down into the bell, and spread out to reshape it as needed during the burn. The largest of the three swarms, though, was responsible for sculpting the interior of the big shard as it was hollowed out. By the way, if you think that these are sort of a thick technical descriptions, I swear to you that I have chosen those which are easiest to understand at the go. So if it worked as it should have, so by the time the Ymir's journey to Easy was finished, most of the ice would have been fed into the hoppers and blown out the nozzle, leaving a hollowed out shell with just enough internal structure to hold the reactor in place and maintains some semblance of a nozzle bell. This was not as crazy as it sounded for two reasons. First, it was what miners had done since time immemorial. They didn't just hollow out mountains, since that would lead to collapse. They sculpted the mountains into structurally sound architectural systems, complete with pillars, arcs, and vaults. Secondly, most of the shard's interior was of little consequence from a structural engineering standpoint. There was a reason why airplanes and race cars had been hollow shells, all skin and no bones. Most structural forces were naturally transmitted through the outermost layer of the vehicle, so that was the best place to put the strength. Enough strength on the outside made it possible to leave the inside hollow. Ice, of course, wasn't the best material to work with. It was brittle, but the Ymir expedition had shipped out carrying a large supply of high-strength plastic cord, net, fabric, and loose fiber. Dinah was in charge of it now and had a lot of learning to do between now and when she became fully responsible for it. Now, on this one, I even changed the color because somehow I expected that, at least in science fiction, he would be sort of imagining technologies that don't exist and probably would never exist. But no, probably because of his sort of technological competence, he's constantly saying that what is being done in this extreme context, it was I would call it an extension of something, as he says, that has been done since time immemorial by the miners or the structure engineers who made airplanes and race cars. As I know much more about science fiction than about the management in extreme context, I'm very curious about what you people who know it much better can comment. How can you comment on that? So what Dinah did, she pulled out the window, the one that she was used to look at checked in her robots. She used to communicate with her network robots and typed in a single word command, jettison. It was a name of a program that was meant to be run simultaneously by every robot in the shard, as well as some other systems down in the boiler room. A prompt came back. Are you sure? Yes, no. Yes, she typed. Congratulations came back. The dead crew of Ymir had sent her a message from the void. Ymir had become grumbling. Dinah felt as if she were trapped inside the belly of a frost giant with indigestion. What she was hearing, she knew, was the collective noise made by thousands of nuts and hundreds of larger robots as they moved to safe positions on the inner surface of the hollow shard and gnawed away at the structural webbing that connected it to the reactor core. Well, of course, not all was like in all management, even the extreme context, there is a human touch element. So one day after Tekla, who was a Russian cosmonaut that was working outside EASY, had left for work, Dinah took one of the chocolate bars she had brought up from Earth, wrote her email address on the wrapper, and handed it off to a grub, which she then put out the airlock. She piloted the grub across Amalthea's surface to the mooring point, where Tekla's vestibule was cabled in place, then made it climb along the cable, which was easy, it had an algorithm for that, and clamber into the vestibule, where it took up position and waited, holding the chocolate bar out in a free claw. When Tekla came back at the end of her shift, Dinah got the satisfaction of watching her unwrap the bar and eat the chocolate. She held up one hand and sort of waved through the plastic. Dinah couldn't resolve her facial expression. Dinah slipped her hand into the data glove, did the thing that made it connect to the grab's free claw, and waved. Tekla's green eyes flicked down in their sockets as she observed this. Still no emotion. Dinah was mildly offended. Was the grab not adorably cute in its ugly mechanical way? Was the wave not an amusing gesture? Tekla held up the candy bar whopper. On it, beneath Dinah's email address, she had written no email. What did that mean? That she lacked an email address? That her tablet couldn't receive it? Or was she imploring Dinah not to communicate with her that way? Dinah made the light flash with the dots and dashes for Morse. Tekla nodded, and Dinah could see her mouth making the word da. Dinah signaled, do you need anything? The faintest trace of smile came over Tekla's lips. It was not a warm kind of smile, more bemused. She held up what was left of the chocolate bar and pointed to it. Dinah returned, tomorrow. Tekla nodded. Then she turned away, her buzz-cut blonde hair glinting in the light of the LEDs, and drifted back into the middle of her onion. So what is happening when the work is done? This is at the end of the first part of the book, which is 500 pages. The book itself is 880 pages. Well, at the end of those two parts that I'm discussing here, the robots weld what remains of EASY, arklets that were sent from the Earth, and other ships in a safe position into a cleft between two asteroids. And as to Dinah, She pulled herself into position before her triptych of flat panels and began opening windows, checking on the activities of her menagerie of robots. Some were sunning themselves on the outside to soak up power. Others were sipping juice from the reactors. Some were mining propellant for the next burn, and others were mending the nozzle. Like, you know, every workers in every other factory. Considering my interest, I'm afraid my final question is exactly about what fascinates me. Namely, will robots manage us, especially in extreme contexts? It's very nice of Stevenson to give the future of humanity to the 7 Eves. As you understand, these are 7 women who are going to help to humanity to survive. And they are at least in the first parts running the robots, but maybe in the future, it will the robots that will be running us. Thank you.